Thank you for such an insightful presentations. I'll be touching on several points that you made earlier. For example, corruption in procurement, why data is not well disclosed. That happens in Thailand as well, despite the fact that you mentioned that we have the FOI law. Somehow it is not quite well enforced. The impact of corruption is so devastated, and which showed in the fact that our CPI, or corruption perception index, is so high if we don't consider Singapore into our formula here. But so that's basically what I'll be discussing today. But I need to disclose this first, that I'm sure that the least, or at least less experienced than most of the people in this room regarding journalism, and so I won't be able to address the fact how the process of how we can get information or how to write news article well, but I'm sure that a few of the questions that we have been facing, which is this corruption? How do we define corruption? Is this good? Is this policy, anti-corruption measure, good policy that we should praise, we should support, or is this something that we should argue against? Or how should we address these things when we hear it? How should we write it in the news? So that is kind of like what I will be presenting today within this 30 minutes presentation. So please allow me to share the screen. This is me. And the first thing that I would like to mention is that I just mentioned earlier, we have been facing these problems a lot, these questions a lot. And the answer is that there is no definite definition for corruption. From the viewpoint of political science, they talk about the use of public power for private gain. From the viewpoint of economists, they say that it's a transgression of formal rules governing the allocation of public resources. So that's the main point, the allocation of resources. So it means that when it derived into the activities that you have observed, to write into news, or you receive from your witness, it could range from just direct bribery to extortion to fraud to speed money and to embezzlement. So this is just to show that there's no definite answer. Corruption can be very narrow. It can be paying money to the police officers, or it can be very broad, appointing your own children into public office as your secretary or something like that. So it can be debatable. But when you want to address this as a corruption issue, these issues can be addressed and be defined as under a big umbrella of the definition of corruption. So don't worry too much about the definition. Academics still argue on this issue. But I would like to take you back a little bit to see how we as an academic approach the issue of corruption since, well, not the beginning per se, but like from 30, 40 years ago. So when we first talk about corruption, that is around 1960s, 1970s. At that time, people were, because before that, academics were still debating whether corruption greases the wheel, making like speed money, making things go faster, or does it sands the wheel, making things go slower. And at the end of the era, the academic kind of agrees, there's a consensus that corruption sands the wheel rather than greases the wheel, making red tape more strict, making bureaucrats and politicians be able to ask for more or get more money from the citizens. So in the year around, once this was a consensus around 1970s, academic view corruption, academic and the public, and of course the media as well, view corruption as associated with power. So many states and government use political science approach to design their anti-corruption policies. And by that, it means when we use the approach of political science, we look at corruption as caused by the power imbalance. So power imbalance by state and society, lack of efficient check and balance system. As a consequence, state can take advantage of the society. So what is the solution for that? A stable and good quality democracy is the key of people to be in the hands of the people, creating power balance and good governance with efficient check and balance system. So it's like that straightforward. What's the problem? Some countries has been able to successfully curb corruption using democracy. But somehow in many countries, for example, in Thailand as well, we have had democracy for the last 80 or 90 years, but somehow we're still facing high level of corruption, as Tess has shown earlier. And I'm sure this happened with many countries as well. So the question of whether democracy kills corruption has been debatable in academic as well. But this has been kind of solved and announced by the Transparency International, who developed the Corruption Perception Index. They recently included the Variety of Democracy project into the calculation of Corruption Perception Index very recently. So it shows that, yes, democracy is very important. But this is a very not quite the latest, but very interesting finding from Stefan Dotter into year 2011. It shows that, well, maybe it's yes and no. Theoretical relationship between corruption and democracy show an upside down U curve, meaning that at the earlier stage of democracy, corruption, it can provoke and allow corruption to increase. And then once we reach the threshold, corruption can decrease with democracy. By having higher democracy. So why? It's such a crazy idea how democracy, which is supposed to be the ultimate solution to fight corruption, can promote corruption in a certain period of time. So in this particular paper, he suggested that because at the earlier stage of corruption, check and balance system has just been established. For example, these anti-corruption agencies, which Tess has again kindly shown us, has just been established. So power from one people has now spread to the hands of many, but not as many in the earlier stage, not in the hand of the people, but on the hand of a few bureaucrats, on the hand of a few politicians with weak check and balance system. So it kind of like be able to increase the level of corruption. And once this institution is strengthened, once the power is allocated to the hand of the people, then that's the threshold that we are looking for, and thus allowing corruption to reduce when we have such a strong, stable, and good quality democracy. So to talk about this is just to say that yes, democracy is the solution, but democracy is such a complex system. It's not just having an election. It needs to be a free and fair election, as well as freedom of speech, freedom of press freedom, so on and so forth. So when we approach corruption and when we approach the topic of democracy, be aware of this as well. That it's something to kind of think about, and after this, most of the people ask me, then what is the threshold? And that is the weak point of this paper, which cannot suggest where the threshold can really be, should be. Is it the timeline? Is it 100 years, or what is it? So basically, it's just a theoretical relationship between corruption and democracy to kind of address this issue theoretically. But in practice, yes, of course, as I mentioned earlier, many democratic states somehow unsuccessful in curbing corruption, maybe because of that upside down U curve. So around 1990s, once we realized that this is a problem, we kind of like turn away a little bit and look at the problem on the legal aspects. Look at it as a problem with the rule of law, that there is no equality before the law, there's no equal justice, and requires equal protection, ensuring that no individuals or groups or individuals can be privileged over the other by the law. So yeah, again, legal approach to design and enforce law as the main anti-corruption policy. So when we took legal approach, we see that corruption is caused by the inefficiency of law enforcement. And so the solution is to establish the rule of law, meaning more clear and more efficient and effective enforcement of the law, and of course, higher participation from the people in designing the law. Once we start believing that the law is the solution, Thailand is one of the very good example. So once we took this approach, we were able to have more 15 anti-corruption laws, and it is increasing. And this is a very high number. Thinking about this is just one single social problem. And each law, thinking about each law is like this thick, and we have like 15 laws and regulations on fighting corruption alone. And again, one more thing that proves that this might not be the only solution is that if you have heard about this policies or this project before, it's called regulatory guillotine. It found that the more laws and regulations we have, the less efficiency we have in our society. The more licenses we have. For example, in Thailand, if you want to establish or register a new factory, you have to go through like tens bureaucratic agencies, and you need to secure like 15 licenses or something like that. So having more law, having a higher number of law doesn't solve the problem quite efficiently and effectively. And on the contrary, reducing the number of laws and regulations has been proven more effective and more efficient in reducing corruption. For example, in this case, Korea has have over 8,000 laws relating to licensing. So after regulatory guillotine, meaning reducing through these process, collection, review, stakeholder engagement, and analysis, public hearing, they were able to reduce 48% of these licenses and saving over 4.4% of their GDP. Sorry, somehow it missed there. And Vietnam as well, for example. Vietnam has 12,000 similar laws, and if we were to revoke over 70% of them, would facilitate over 1 million job creation. And many countries in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, has been able to adopt this project to a certain extent. Thailand has adopted this project in a few years ago, but somehow it ended up with a very big report. The government hasn't been trying to actually enforce or reduce the number of these laws. So just to wrap up on this approach is that, well, looking at the corruption problem through legal lens, legal approach is one solution, but we cannot solve it by having too many laws and increasing the number of laws every year to solve one single problem. So if this is the problem, democracy is right, is the way, but well, there's so many things in democracy. It's such a complex. We need there are many factors in establishing stable and good quality democracy. Increasing number of law may not be the solution. So what is the solution? Around year 2000, we as an academic, we were having this question. So how to approach this? Social science then came into play. They were proposed as an alternative solution. Well, social science, similar to journalism, or to a certain extent, find that, well, corruption is caused by personal relationship. For example, causing favoritism, leading to special and unfair treatment, which facilitate bribery, so on and so forth. So the solution, there's no specific, explicit solution, but rather often more better understanding of the people and the phenomenon. And this is where it benefit the journalism directly. This is from one of the research that I conducted last year with social scientists and a professor at the marketing department. We would like to know that, well, we have spent tens of thousands, or if not 100 of million baht in campaigning people to fight corruption. And when they asked the National Anti-Corruption Commission, who are your target group, they say that everyone in the country is their target group. And this confused people in marketing so much, because if you say that everyone is your target group, then it means that you must have $1 billion baht, $1 billion US for budget for the campaign, right? Because you cannot sell everything to everyone at one time. So we conducted this research to really to understand people and how they perceive corruption and anti-corruption effort differently. We were able to separate people into 4 groups. One on the first group here are the group that, oh, sorry about the Thai. So the first group, or the front line here, the group that they are very actively involved with anti-corruption efforts already. And on the 4th group here as the individualists, meaning that they do not care much about corruption. And we try to understand their behavior, their what do they like, don't they like, what kind of message do they like. And we found that if we were to, these 2 groups may not be our target groups, because one of them are our loyal customers already, and one of them will need lots of investment in order to pull them into the anti-corruption work with us. So these 2, then group 2 and group 3, who are in the middle, they might just need a little nudge in order to bring them on into the anti-corruption project, the anti-corruption effort. So once we found who our target groups were, we try to see how communication would affect people behavior differently. So we used a behavioral economics experiment, social experiment, to test on 100,000 people in Thailand, and we found that the message which has high creativity, less aggressive, explained with kind of like emotion, letting them see the impact of corruption and use less number, will be able to pull people, especially these 2 groups, into joining our anti-corruption efforts better than using a more aggressive and use higher number. So that's from our experiment. Another point is we conducted another experiment using a game called Corrupt the Game, which was developed by one of our colleagues. We found that different types of corruption can be solved differently, and also with different difficulty levels. So the methodology is very lengthy, so I won't go much into that. But we found that people tend to think that bribery is more obvious than helping your friends illegally, than providing funds to some budgets, procurement budget to your friend. So if we were to approach this and create success story, let's fight bribery first. And then when we have success story, we will be able to tell this story and give hope to the people. And then they will follow with the following more difficult corruption to problem types, for example. Also, I thought that this would be quite interesting for you. Under the umbrella social science, there's this approach called linguistics. So I worked with a professor from the Department of Linguistics, and he suggested that, well, language can make people feel differently about corruption as well. So choosing words correctly can help achieving the goal. In our first experiment, we separate our people into two control group. One of the group you see here on the left-hand side, we give them a piece of paper suggesting a message suggesting that corruption is like devil, and the rest is like corruption is so high, the impact is so high, and so on and so forth. And in the other group, in the other room, we gave them the similar message, but the difference is we say that corruption is like disease, and we should do this, and corruption is so high, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then we ask them how would they suggest to fight corruption. 80% of people who receive the message that corruption is like devils suggested that we should increase punishment, we should kill, execute the corrupt culprits. While 80% in this group who received the word that corruption is like disease suggested that we should have better monitoring system. We should have better check and balance system. So this happened within 30 seconds with just one different word. What will happen to us who have read newspapers, online news for like 30, 40 years? How different wording in different newspaper in different countries affect our behavior. So the second research based on this finding, we went to Indonesia a couple of years ago, met several people at the Jakarta Post, and we looked at the wordings of comparing over 300 million words from the two newspapers in two countries. We use English because it's easier to do the word mining process. But what we found is that in Bangkok Post in Thailand, we use words that cause drama, meaning that causing people to be very emotional, using death, take away things. While in the Jakarta Post, most of the words when they talk about corruption, they talk about laws and regulation, collaboration, participation, system, media, news, and it allows this to happen. I'm sure that you from Indonesia can tell me better about this incident that people gather when the KPK budget was cut, and people gather to kind of like to protest against the government cutting the budget of the KPK, which is their anti-corruption agencies. This has never happened in Thailand. And Indonesia has like 100 anti-corruption groups and civil societies, organizations, formal and both informal and formal. In Thailand, we have 20 to 30 organizations. So we try to somehow relate these two together to find out that wordings in newspapers, in articles can affect the behavior and how people react to corruption. Furthermore, we were so interested in how media use words when they compare with corruption. So we would like to know what people would behave when we compare corruption to a different circumstance. On the left-hand side, again, this is like the first experiment. We separate people into two groups. One group, we gave them a message suggesting that corruption is like fire, your house is on fire. On the second group, we gave a message suggesting that corruption is like you piloting a ship through storms, and your ship is about to be sink. So what do you think, who should be responsible for each case? Apparently, again, 80% answer differently. 80% in this group suggested that everyone should be able to help when we say that corruption is like fire, your house is on fire, because it kind of gives you the impression that everyone can help. We can have a bucket of water and they throw the water into the fire and it helps. But on the right-hand side, when we say that it's like a ship going through storms, people tend to suggest that the person who should be responsible is the leader in that country, because you kind of like give the responsibility to the pilot of the ship, the captain, the ship captain. So, and you kind of like have to sit and pray in hoping that they will be able to take you through the storms. So just small words like this change people behavior and change how people think. Okay, I started with suggesting that I'm an economist. I have like 5 minutes left, so I'll go through this very quickly. So where have the economists been? We have always been there, but we don't like to talk about corruption that much, perhaps because it's too difficult of a problem to approach. We'd rather talk about how to make money. But there are people who talk about corruption as well. For example, in the neoclassical economics, which we consider as the mainstream economics, think that corruption occurs when benefit outweigh cost. So the solution is to increase punishment and detection. So based on this idea, they use the rational choice theory. And for example, if you think about whether people will rob a bank, they will think, yes, I would do it if the money gain is higher than the gun and the cost of gun and ammunition and criminal plus criminal charges, or another word, likelihood to gain money is more than the likelihood to be caught. So based on this rational choice theory, Professor Robert Clifford created this corruption formula. He suggested that discretion plus monopoly minus accountability equals to corruption. So basically, if we were to reduce corruption, we should reduce discretion, because politicians and bureaucrats can use their power to do anything. We need to reduce that monopoly. We don't want someone to take control of the power. We need to increase accountability, which include transparency, accountability, data, openness, as Tess again has already suggested. So you have covered almost everything, Tess. Thank you for that. So I don't have to go through it so much. There are other kinds of economics, other schools of thoughts as well. For example, the political economics, as you see, Karl Marx here suggests that it's exploitation. One class exploit, the capitalists exploit the labor from the labor class. So what can be the solution is a people movement and civil society. And this, as I mentioned earlier, this is pictures from what happened in Thailand, which is very little compared to other countries. For example, in Indonesia, you should be very proud of yourself. We have so much lower number of anti-corruption organization in our country, but we've been trying to create more collaboration among people. And these are, for example, some of the organizations. We have some news. For example, here is SIAM Institute, which is one of the biggest investigative journalism in Thailand. We try to support them with Must Share and Watchdog Group, which is a social media online group, and they work together very well. So this is one of the model that we have, that SIAM Lab, Enhanced Social Enterprise, help created collaboration amongst informal and formal news institution, and to cross the border into this is the prevention group. For example, the Integrity Pact, working on creating higher transparency in procurement. And this is the cultivation, so curriculum for students and young and children to teach them about the negative effects of corruption. So when they work together, ISRA or the investigative journalism will have more things to write about, and they have been able to successfully do that in the past years. Also, 1 minute left, 2 minutes left, thank you. There are also other approach, for example, institution economics. We explain that corruption is caused by asymmetric information, meaning that the bureaucrats or the politicians have more information than the people, or more than the media. So bettering monitoring system reduce transaction costs, that helps. And this is where the media comes into play, because the media are able to reduce this asymmetric information problem. Also, at the same time, institutional economics leads to the establishment of these agencies, the KPK, the CPAB, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, and the Thailand Anti-Corruption Commission. I would like to end this presentation here with this case studies, which was very recent in Thailand. If you see this is a light pole, very beautiful, but it's installed into a nowhere land. No one passes through this. This single pole, a post, costs around how much? 2,000 pounds, 1,000 to 3,000 US dollars, for example. So it's something like that. one citizen found this. If we don't have any data available, public data available, or as Tess put it, as procurement data available, we wouldn't be able to do it. And that has been lacked in Thailand. We don't know how much this costs. We don't know who is responsible for this, and why are they there. So SIAM Lab and at the Chulalongkorn University and Hand Social Enterprise with the anti-corruption organization Thailand has been able to develop this. We were proud to present this. This is called ACT AI. So we spent years gathering 20 million data set from the procurement, from the government procurement platform, and put into this Google-like web page called ACT AI. ACT is Anti-Corruption Thailand, and AI is like artificial intelligence, using artificial intelligence to get all the information and analyze information. And we found this, and we these are the companies who bid for this project, how much they bid for it. And if you can see this, it's very, this is the name is not disclosed, yeah. But if you can see this, this is from the real case. It's very astonishing. So this is the reference price. This is how much below the reference price the actual price is. And you can see this, there are 5 companies bidding for the same project. All the 4 companies bid the same price. One company bid just 1,000 baht less than the other 4. And so this CCC company won the bid. It is very clear that it has very high risk for collusion and high risk for corruption in this case. So Isara news agencies and all social media agencies used this case, and we were able to stop this project and put people behind this project behind bars. So that is one success story from having less asymmetric information, from the collaboration of data with the civil society and with the investigative journalism. Established new projects. We were able to understand corruption differently. We were able to provide suggestions to the media, to the state national anti-corruption commission, to the civil society groups who work on this particular problem. And when we work together using knowledge and research from the academic side, we work together to create new possibilities to fight corruption together. So I end my presentation here. Thank you very much.